Speech and language therapy assists children who have disorders of speech, language, communication, and swallowing. Psychology provides both educational and clinical services, including counseling and parenting. ABA therapy focuses on improving specific behaviors. It is commonly practiced as a therapeutic intervention for individuals with autism. Specialist learning support. We assist in developing the academic and social development of students who need support in all these areas. And we design and host local and international training and workshops for practitioners, parents, caregivers, and educators. Just like this one today. We have a few rules to follow during the webinar. Please remain muted while the speaker is presenting. Please give your full attention to the presentation. We will be sending you the replay, so you can review at any time. Please be interactive if the speaker requests your participation. During the question and answer session, we kindly request everyone to type their questions in the chat box and the speaker will address them. Welcome to the 74th TDCC webinar worldwide, Transforming Learning and Behavior in Children Who Learn Differently.
TDCC is honored to welcome back Debbie Gilmore, a dedicated educational leader, for another insightful session in our webinar series. As the Executive Director of the Aerosmith program, Debbie brings a wealth of experience as a teacher, principal, and administrator. With a master's in education and graduate certifications in diverse learning, she is deeply passionate about the brain's role in learning and student success. Debbie has been a strong advocate for integrating neuroplastic programming into education to enhance cognitive functioning and foster lifelong learners. She pioneered an initiative to bring the Aerosmith program to schools and has since led its strategic growth, championing its transformative impact on students' lives. As both an educator and a parent, Debbie has witnessed firsthand the life-changing potential of the program for students and the communities that support them. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Debbie Gilmore.
Hi everyone, it's so lovely to be with you all again. For those people that are joining us for another session of this series of workshops, welcome back. And for those that are joining just for the first time, it's really great to have you with us. I'm so excited to be here and working with the TDCC community again. I've had the pleasure of actually being with them over the last 3 days in Dubai, and it's just an extraordinary team of people that really are very focused on working to support parents and teachers to support children. It's a joy to be able to work with this organization. And of course, now TDCC, under the banner of BrainLinks, have been offering the Aerosmith program for over a year now, and it's where they're seeing amazing results. Not surprising, but extraordinary and amazing results. So it is really delightful to be here with them today. As I mentioned, I have been here in Dubai over the last 3 days, but for the last 2 weeks, I've actually been speaking with lots of educators and parents. I've been to Riyadh, I've been to Cairo and in Doha, and I've been speaking with them about topics that are important to them and important now to them. And it's so interesting that the topic of behavior and learning differently has been really one of those hot topics. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen now, and I just have to make sure I do it correctly because I have some audio to share. Sometimes I forget to do that. So let me, there we are. And let me share the right screen. And we should be ready to go. Is that all working? Fantastic. So again, thank you. And oh, I must say, for people that sent in questions when you registered for this presentation, thank you so much, because I used all of those. I looked through every single one of those questions, and there may be some I am unable to answer in this session, but I do hope that I have been able to answer the majority of those questions here. And of course, there will be a Q&A session at the end, but so I hope, though, the majority of those questions are answered in my session today. So as you know, this session today is going to be talking about transforming learning and behavior for children that learn differently. And as I mentioned, this is the last of a series of webinars that TDCC have done over the last year and a half. And these are all available on TDCC website here that you can see. It's on this slide. So if you want to go back and have a look at some of the other topics, please feel free to do that. In fact, the last one that I did on building confidence, focus, and emotional resilience is very linked with today's presentation. So you may want to go back and have a look at that one. This is what I hope to cover today. I hope to cover these things. So I want to start with definitions of behavior and learning differently. In fact, that was a question that many of you asked. What do we mean by that? So I'm going to ask you to put your ideas in the chat in a minute, and then I'll tell you some of the things that I hear. And then I'm going to look at the brain and cognitive functions. I hope that's a little clearer after I speak to you. And then we'll look at the link between learning and behavior. And then we'll look at increasing the capacity of the brain, which is very exciting. And then we look under the labels of learning difficulties. We like to see things with a cognitive lens. So you'll hear a little bit about that. And then we'll talk about Arrowsmith and how you can access it through the BrainLinks team. So here we go. And this is our topic, transforming learning and behavior in children who learn differently. So I wonder what you mean by that. Let's focus on behavior for a moment. And this is where I want you to find the chat box in the Zoom application. And I'd really like you to share with other people in this group. What do you define behavior as? And when you observe behavior, what do you see? What do you observe? And then when you're observing behavior, how do you feel? If you're a parent or a teacher or other professionals that work with children. And I suppose I'm talking mostly about children today, and though we know some behaviors carry on through life. So it's not isolated to children. So I'd really love it if you could, in the chat, take a minute just to write down what you mean by what you see as, what you define as behavior. When you observe it, what are you seeing? And then how do you feel? Please pop that in the chat. Thank you for those people. We'll just do this for another, say, 30 seconds. Someone has already shared there in the chat. How else do other people see it? Thank you. So I'm going to share those. You probably can see these in the chat, and what people see as behavior. But certainly behavior seems to be communicating something. And Many of you have said that. So there's a means of communication, a way that a student can express needs, an expression of internal state or a response to the environment. Behavior, there's another great definition there. A behavior is anything a person does, actually. That's a great one. Someone has honed in on what they mean by behavior. They've put abnormal behavior. That's an interesting distinction. I'll talk about that in a minute. And that someone is reacting or acting or reacting with peers or their environment. Another person has said they're seeing overactivity. Very, very similar views here by everyone in this group. It's a way in which someone conducts themselves, expressing how they feel. That's really interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. And here we are. So just like that person added in the chat there's abnormal behavior and then there's typical behavior. I put it in two columns here on this slide. When I speak with teachers and parents, sometimes they say the word behavior, but really what they're saying and talking about is challenging behaviors. And then, of course, we know that sometimes we classify things as good behavior or typical behavior. So I put these in two different columns here. These are not definitive, of course, because there's so many words that could fit under these headers. But I do pose some questions here, and I just put some ideas in here. And as I said, this is not a definitive list, but they are things that come up quite a lot when I speak with teachers and educators and parents. So my first question is challenging. Let's look at the challenging behavior column. Is it a choice? Is it because there's no discipline? Are they being oversensitive? I hear people, I've heard from people that have observed behaviors and they've said to me that child needs resilience. I've heard people say it's poor parenting. Some people call it, in some aspects of the behavior they see, emotional dysregulation. Sometimes on report cards, we read the child doesn't listen, or they're lazy, or they lack motivation. And then there's the other side of the coin, the good behaviors. And I put that in quote marks there because are the behaviors always good? And this is my question here on this column. We can see really quiet children and a child that pleases others. And they never question the teacher, never question the parent. They're compliant. They help others all the time. They never complain. And they're happy to sit by themselves and play for hours. I put that quote around good behaviors. Are these always good behaviors? Let me tell you, as a parent, sometimes we don't want our children, don't ask us questions or question what we've asked you to do. Sometimes we get a little bit annoyed about that if a child or even if someone else does that to us. We're really happy if our child does what we've asked them to do. That is a good expectation. But what happens if they're always compliant? What happens if they are doing those things? They're quiet and they please others. They never question what you're doing, but they're 16 or 17. I think that's when those behaviors turn into what someone called here an abnormal behavior, because at that age of development, that is when we should be seeing children question us and really poking the stick at their parents, really saying, hang on a minute, why do I have to do that? And sometimes we don't see it. So I put a question around all of that concept of behavior. Let's go now to the next part of this topic today, learning differently. Just like with behavior, I'd love you to pop in the chat to share with others what you define that as. And if someone is learning differently, how do you observe that? And then as a parent or a teacher or another professional working with children, how do you feel when you see that? Please take the time and share that with others. Has anyone got anything to share with that? I'm just not seeing anything. I'm happy if people don't want to share. It's also perfectly fine. I will continue. Well, I might move on then, and if I see something pop up, I'll refer to it. Oh, there we are. Someone has said, Mariam said, learning in a way that is not typical. So that's absolutely. You see it in different ways to teach the children other than the fixed ways. Okay. Children are often misunderstood when they learn differently. They see frustration and lack of knowledge. Learning differently is learning outside of the box. That's an interesting way of expressing that. Thank you for that. I observe children learning in a unique way. I really love that viewpoint. Learning differently can also mean they can't memorize or they can't concentrate well, even though they're obedient and a good listener. That's interesting. And their speech could be incomprehensible. Or they're very busy in the learning context. That also can happen. I'm sure this is resonating with many of you in this session today. They learn differently. They just learn in a unique way. And someone has difficulty following multi-step interactions. Thank you very much for those responses. I appreciate that, because I'm sure that your observations and your feelings and your definitions are thought about or shared by many other people in this group. Someone said here, learning visually or auditorily, using their hands or being kinesthetic. That's great, in a different learning environment. Sometimes a shadow teacher here has said they don't know what to do when they have bad behavior. Okay, so these are some words that people use when they want to describe learning differently. We hear the word neurodiverse a lot now. It is a very good descriptor of this. We have labels or diagnoses that come up a lot. We quite often hear people say, I'm a left brain learner or a right brain learner. We hear people say, I'm a visual learner or an auditory learner. Someone mentioned that in the chat. Sometimes people say, oh, I prefer a particular subject, like I'm a maths person versus a language person or an English person or a science person or a history person. Sometimes we hear people under this banner of learning differently is that they struggle with memory, or they need longer time to complete tasks, or they need better strategies to actually do the task. Sometimes we hear things like, well, they learn differently, but they could learn better if they were in a smaller class size, or they learn differently, so they should be in a smaller class size. Sometimes I hear people say, well, they're just slow to develop, or they're slow to bloom, or they have difficulty with writing tasks, or they're a really high achiever. These are many of the descriptions that I hear. I'm seeing more come in now into the chat about what people see here. They understand things in their own way. Absolutely. I think what all of this is describing is the uniqueness of our brains, the uniqueness of how everyone is and shows up in the world. And of course, why are we all unique? Because all of this is happening in our brain. Learning and behavior, there's an intricate link between learning and behavior. And that's because it happens in our brains, and our brains are unique. So what I'm going to do now is talk about the brain and some cognitive functions. At Arrowsmith, we talk about cognitive functions. I hope I'm going to explain this to you now. A cognitive function is a region of the brain or a network of regions that come together to perform a specific job or a role. Now, when we do that job or task, we will most usually use our strength areas. We'll use the strength areas of our brain to do the task. And sometimes if a task is difficult for us, one of those cognitive functions that are required for the task are probably underperforming. And this is how we know that cognitive functions work on a continuum. Some of our own cognitive functions are at the superior end. Some are in the average range. Some are below average, above average. Some are very severe. It would be highly unusual for all cognitive functions to sit in one of those categories. They are always spread out across this continuum. And so that makes us uniquely who we are, that makeup, that unique cognitive profile of how our cognitive functions work and the connections and how the permutations of this continuum. That makes us uniquely who we are. That makes us show up in the world as we are, and the same with the children that we work with. They show up in the world with their cognitive profile in various areas on this continuum. I'm now going to talk more in depth of three cognitive functions. I've chosen these three because they are critical in the learning process. Not only are they critical in the learning process, they're critical in everyday life. As I talk through some of these aspects, I want you to think about some jobs or tasks or actions that you have seen in the person or the child that you have come along here today to think about. See how these cognitive functions are operating for that particular child. So the first one is symbolic thinking. It is the cognitive function which is responsible for thinking and planning, problem solving, for goal setting, for planning task execution, like working out how to execute that task. And it helps us maintain attention on the task at hand until a solution is found. It helps us find the main idea, block out other information that's coming into the brain. This is the cognitive function that does that. It's part of the executive function in the left prefrontal cortex. sometimes this could be underperforming. I think many of you in your questions that you sent through, and some people in the chat here, have recognized that the person that you work with or your own child may have this underperforming. So if symbolic thinking is underperforming, it leads to difficulties in these things. So now think about the person, your child or your student. Think about this. Do they have difficulties in thinking and reflecting, generating ideas, planning and setting goals, prioritizing, or problem solving, seeing the main idea? Do they have difficulties in being self-directed? Do they have difficulties in mental initiative? What about how they organize their tasks, organize themselves to complete those tasks? Do they have difficulties in developing strategies? Do they find it really hard to make decisions? And when they act, do they consider all of the possibilities before they act, or do they just rush in? If some of these things are a difficulty, it could mean that these cognitive functions are underperforming. And you can imagine many of the tasks that students are asked to do every single day, not just at school, but they're asked to do these tasks involve symbolic thinking. And if this is underperforming, those tasks will be difficult. Let's move on to predicative speech, another really critical function that is required for us to execute tasks. Why? Because it's involved in sequential logic. So you have to do this before you do that, before you do that, before you do that. There's an interconnection of the steps that need to be taken to execute a task. Quite often, we see this show up in grammatical sentences. Sometimes when a student is writing, the writing is not quite grammatically correct because that grammar has a logic to it. It's also responsible for that internal speech. So you know when we are walking into a situation that is a little bit uncomfortable, we rehearse what we're going to do. We rehearse our behavior. Predicative speech helps us do that. It helps us to plan how we're going to behave. Now, of course, if this is underperforming, it shows up like this. They ask questions multiple times. Now, if a student in your class was asking questions multiple times, sometimes on a report card, a parent may receive doesn't listen, lacks attention, doesn't focus. If there's a predicative deficit, if it's underperforming, they will speak in short sentences because their grammar is too difficult to navigate. So they speak in shorter sentences rather than longer sentences. They rely heavily on directions or a sequence of steps. So if you ask them to execute a task, they will actually need the steps written down in front of them because they don't have that sequential logic. They rely on others for guidance to complete the task. So they say, can you write those steps down? Or I'm just going to follow you. I'll follow the steps that you do. They rely on stereotypical speech. If this is a difficulty, what quite often what will happen is in one circumstance, they will have a conversation and they will use the same sentences over and over again. And then they'll get into another social setting or another, conversation somewhere else. And you'll hear the same sentences being spoken. And then another way it shows up is they try to memorize the steps word for word over and over and over again, because they find it hard to internalize the information, to remember the steps. So they really try to memorize it rather than internalize that. And this is the last cognitive function I'm going to talk about today. There are many others, and you'll see some pop up on some other slides. But this is also probably the most critical cognitive function that we use every day. And again, as I talk about this cognitive function, think about the students or your child and how they show up in the world. Let's have a look. Symbol relations is responsible for understanding and connecting ideas. I call it the connect the dots. And so that's exactly what it does. It processes complex relationships, connects concepts, and comprehends. That can be in reading or in speech, what they're hearing. Now, if they have an underperforming symbol relations, it leads to difficulties in reading, comprehension, understanding what is being said, mathematical reasoning, logical reasoning. One thing I don't have up here is critical thinking. Cause and effect. If this happens, that will happen. If you do that, that's going to happen. Why you did this and then that person did this. See how that's related to behavior? They also find it difficult to follow lectures or movies or plots. So they may ask questions all the time. What is happening? What is happening? What is happening? What's happening now? That looks like inattention. They find it very difficult to understand jokes or metaphors or irony. If you think about that, those jokes, metaphors, and irony have complex relationships that you need to connect together. They find it difficult to read an analog clock. Why? Because on an analog clock, the hands are in relationship to each other. So when one hand moves, the other hand moves. So they find that difficult. And then sometimes they get reversals in their letters because they can't understand the relationship between the symbol and the way it looks on a page. But there's good news. The good news is that using the power of neuroplasticity, the power of the brain to change, all of these cognitive functions can be enhanced. We can absolutely enhance these cognitive capacities. And even better, by increasing their cognitive capacity, we increase the learning capacity of the student. We increase the positive behaviors of that student, and we decrease the challenging behaviors. You would have noticed as I went through those difficulties that some of those behaviors we talked about at the beginning of this session actually were being named because that cognitive function was underperforming. Now let's have a look at, I'm going to move here. And if you joined us for our last webinar, you would recognize this slide because it's what I used last time. And I did that because there is that intricate link between learning differently and behavior. If we find learning difficult, we can have very poor self-esteem, or we feel insecure. We have low emotional well-being because we don't know what's happening in the world around us. So what happens, and you named it in the chat, there's a reaction to how we show up or how we're feeling. So and let's put it in child terms. The child is really reacting to the situation through their behavior. They're trying to communicate to us how they're feeling. And it leads to impact on behavior. And we usually see the three classics: fight, flight, or freeze. That's what shows up. What's happening is in the amygdala is the part of the brain that regulates emotions, such as fear and aggression. And when something is unsure, when you're unsure what's going to happen to you, if you're not understanding the world around you, your amygdala is always on high alert. So that it's the threat detector, the brain's threat detector. So it's always ready to fight or flight or freeze. So this is why we see this link between learning differently or underperforming cognitive functions and behavior, because the amygdala, the brain, has to stay vigilant and alert to look for danger. And again, I repeat, the good news is that we can enhance these cognitive capacities, increase the positive behaviors, decrease the anxiety, decrease the stress, decrease the amygdala being on alert, decrease the fight, flight, or freeze response. So how do we increase the capacity of the brain? Through neuroplasticity, which I talked about before. This is the brain's ability to change. It changes its physical structure and its functional organization to form new neural networks right throughout our life. That's really good news. I think the oldest student we've had in Arrowsmith is 84. Why? Because the brain can change right across our lifespan. It gives us a lot of hope. So I'm going to now quickly talk about what happens when we enhance these three cognitive functions that I talked about before. When we enhance these, we see an increased ability to, in symbolic thinking, we see an increased ability to plan, problem solve. We see increased attention. We see an improved ability to judge and think critically. We see better goal setting, better reflection, better ability to stay on task. We see more initiative in the thought process. We see better ability to imagine a range of possibilities and a range of consequences. We also see increased ability to self-organize and self-regulate. The World Economic Forum has 21st century learning skills, so any educators in the room will understand this. Where does symbolic thinking come up in those 21st century learning skills? Here. Nearly all of the skills that our students need for the future involve symbolic thinking. Let's have a look at predicative speech. When we increase that, we increase the ability to learn mathematics, mathematical procedures, scientific procedures. We increase the ability to direct our actions and do that internal rehearsal. That's really handy. When we want to behave in a certain way, we need that internal rehearsal. So we see the increased ability to do that. Then we see improvements in written and spoken expression, because remember I was talking about the predicative speech is required for grammatical correctness. And we also improve the ability to pick up vocabulary more quickly. Why? Because it makes sense in the sentence. Let's see where predicative speech, which is an auditory memory function, let's see where that pops up in 21st century learning skills. Nearly all of them. We need that. Really critical. And here's symbol relations. When we increase the power to be able to understand, comprehend, we see faster processing speed. We see a quicker conceptual grasp of what we're reading or hearing. Increased critical thinking, increased logical reasoning. And we see a greater insight into processes and behaviors. Remember that cause and effect. If I behave like this, this is going to happen. I now can connect those dots. That might make me think twice before I behave like that. Or I behave like that and I hurt that person and I didn't want to hurt that person. Now I can understand the connections. you understand and connect multiple ideas and perspectives. You have a deeper comprehension, greater vocabulary acquisition, increased reading speed, and an increased sense of humor. Where does that show up in the 21st century learning skills? Every single one. This is such a critical cognitive function. I can't stress that enough. So I'm quickly now, before the end of our session, we've got about 15 minutes, I'm going to quickly talk about where these three cognitive functions pop up in various aspects of what we ask students to do when they go to school. These are the other cognitive functions. You'll not only see these three, but just remember the three were symbolic thinking, symbol relations, and predicative speech. They are in the middle of that, that screen that you see here. Let's see where they pop up in acquiring reading, writing, and mathematics skills. There they are. They pop up. What about making and keeping friends? What cognitive functions are involved in that? There they are again. So not only in academic acquisition, but also in maintaining relationships and understanding relationships. What about in following rules and instructions? It's when students don't follow rules that sometimes they get into trouble. Sometimes we think they have challenging behaviors. Here, they need symbolic thinking, they need symbol relations to be strong, to be able to do that. What about navigating playgrounds or hallways in the school? There they are, symbol relations pops up, symbolic thinking pops up. These are absolutely critical to be performing well in a student's life. And again, I repeat, the good thing is, it's really, really good news actually, it's very hopeful that we can enhance his cognitive capacity. We can increase the learning capacity, we can increase the positive behaviors and decrease the challenging behaviors. And by enhancing cognitive capacity, we can enhance academic curriculum, we can enhance cognitive, that's cognitive enhancement, and that leads to lifelong learning. Very quickly, I'm going to run through a couple of the diagnoses. At the beginning of the talk, I talked about what do we mean by learning differently. Sometimes we talk diagnoses. Arrowsmith likes to go under the label, as you can tell by now. Arrowsmith likes to go under those labels and see what's underneath the diagnosis. But given that we're concentrating on symbolic thinking, symbol relations, and predicative speech today, have a look and see where they pop up in common diagnoses. I'm just quickly going to run through these. You will see them pop up in nearly every one of these disorders or these diagnoses. This is why we do focus on these three cognitive functions, because they are quite critical to behavior, to learning. And the good thing is, again, they can be increased. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Arrowsmith now. We call it a cognitive program. It's cutting edge because it really targets and strengthens specific cognitive functions that no other program can do. It's backed by science. Actually, science was used to create the program, and it continues to be backed by science. It uses the principles of neuroplasticity that I talked about before to change the brain, and they're inherent in the exercise. So the facilitators that work with the students who are trained by Arrowsmith, they know how to train the students in the exercise themselves, and then so they're actually using the principles of neuroplasticity every time they're working in the exercise. And as you can see, it strengthens the brain. The program can strengthen the brain to learn efficiently and effectively. It's been in operation 47 years. It might be new to you, but actually it's been around for 47 years. But it is new to Egypt and Saudi and UAE, as I talked about before. They've just, Egypt is as early as just last week. We've got our brand new center there. Kippo is going to be starting there, and they're going to be training in the next little bit. So it's around the world, which is good for those people that travel and their children need to go to various schools around the world. The research tells us that these are the high-level research results. These are the outcomes of the program. That cognitive and academic performance improves, increased independence and self-directed learning. And let me tell you, when I speak to parents, that's number one for them, that their child who learns differently or has challenging behavior, they're going to be able to be independent. It's very important. And of course, the next one, we all want this for our children, increased emotional and social well-being. And then there's that independence in daily living skills. If I saw your faces here and I asked this question, I'd be seeing nodding heads. All those parents that have to be the prefrontal cortex for their children and help them when they get up out of bed, and then you have to tell them every single direction that they have to do every day to get out the door to school. Daily living skills. We, as parents, we think, how are they ever going to survive without me if they can't even work out that sequence of steps? So we see an increase in those daily living skills. We also see an increase in rate of learning, which is not usual when we're putting in accommodations and modifications into an academic curriculum. And what we see is the gap widen. But if you increase the cognitive capacity, actually the gap shortens, because we've seen in research that there's been double or triple the rate of learning for students in their academic performance. We see students go from an I can't do attitude to an I can do attitude. So that's shifted into a growth mindset. And they feel like they have control over their lives. Just imagine the behavior of some children when everything is done to them because they find it so difficult to do certain tasks that they have to have the help all through the day. That changes. They then feel, I have control. So think about it, that amygdala, it calms down because I have control over my life. That's a big shift. And we also see increase in attention, focus, and listening. Let's listen to Rachel here, who will tell us about her children. There's actually a lot of people talking on this video, so let's take a minute to watch this.
Our brain is complex. It not only shapes who we are, it also determines how we understand others and our world. The good news is that we can change our brains through neuroplasticity. This is the brain's ability to change, to make new pathways and neural connections and rewire our brains. Neuroplastic change allows us to enhance cognitive strengths or deal with cognitive challenges such as learning difficulties. At Aerosmith, we believe that everyone has the right to enhance their brains. Research has proven this is possible. Since 1978, Aerosmith has been using neuroplasticity to change brains and transform the lives of people of all ages.
If I didn't do the Aerosmith program, I would be as mature as a 7 or an 8-year-old.
The idea of Aerosmith is that it's a program that's been finely honed to give you maximum benefit over, limited time.
The exercises, like clocks, have helped me with reasoning, completing tasks, and they've helped me not be so confused anymore.
In my mind, there is no way I could have a learning dysfunction. And knowing my issues with work, I thought, well, okay, I know what these issues are and I can deal with this myself, but they just kept coming back. I can see changes in me that I didn't even conceptualize as being possible. I knew there was a change as soon as I started doing my legal work, and I was able to work with ease.
The changes I would have noticed when I started probably would have been to pay more attention, so I was able to focus more on tasks. So if my mom said to go down to the grocery store, I remember a list of items that I had to get and I wouldn't mess up at all. I even get the right brand of products if they had them.
He's aspiring to things he never would have even thought were possible before. And that's how he feels about himself on the inside now. You know, it's just such a change in him as a person. I feel like I've got my boy back.
We've come to Arrowsmith because Isabel's really struggled through her entire school career. She's 12 and she's never been able to, particularly struggles with maths, but has struggled with everything through her life, with anything to do with education, working memory, all of those sorts of things. Like there was a little flame inside her that was fluttering, and it's a real glow inside her now. There's this real little burn in her of confidence, and we're seeing it for the first time because she's a kid that's never had confidence. She's never gone to school and said, yeah, I can do this.
The major change is that before, I never wanted to figure things out, like a TV program or anything that is computer-wise. But now, Arrowsmith gets you to think, why not try it? You want to try it when you go to Arrowsmith. Before I didn't want to try anything, but now it's like a new little world, and this is at 67. I mean, you can't lose.
It's a fantastic opportunity for people, and I'd say grab it with both hands. Just do it.
It'll literally change the brain. It'll change it so that you'll be able to dream up so many new things, and soon you'll have the brain of an adult that's still being a kid. It really does work, and I'm so glad I've got this opportunity.
So I'm going to hand over to Emma now, who's going to talk about Arrowsmith at BrainLinks by TDCC.
Hi everybody, thank you so much, Debbie. So we are lucky to be a provider for Arrowsmith. We have got 6 trained teachers for Arrowsmith, and we have classes that runs in the morning and in the afternoon and the evening. If anybody is interested, if you're in a school, we're able to provide classes for schools, and we're also able to do assessments to get an individual cognitive profile for everybody. We also have a questionnaire on our website that you're able to do yourself just to get a rough idea what your kind of profile is. But we do a thorough Arrowsmith assessment, which is 6 hours, and we test all the cognitive functions in Arrowsmith. After that, we then would give you an individualised cognitive profile feedback. We would then make up a plan for you to join the programme, and you would start classes 4 times a week per cognitive function. So you can do 1 cognitive function or you can do multiple, depending on the time availability. We take students starting from 6 years all the way up there. We've got our oldest student is 62 and we go beyond that. So if you are interested, please get in contact with the Developing Child Centre and we will help get you on the right path. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emma. Now we're at question time. I did put together some questions. Oh, sorry, Emma, I didn't have that up there. Let me just, if you want to just take a screenshot of that. Sorry, I meant to have that up while Emma was talking. You might want to, if you're interested, take a screenshot of that, or it'll be in the recording, of course, that you receive from the team after our webinar finishes. I did put together some questions from your questions, and they were in these various categories. So behaviours. I hope what I've been able to do today is put a cognitive lens on behaviour. so that we understand it a little better and how it's linked to the brain as a form of communication about underperforming cognitive functions. Don't get me wrong, there are behaviors that are acceptable and not, and I am not excusing behaviors that are challenging. I'm not excusing them. I'm trying to help us understand them. And of course, if behaviors are violent, if behaviors are aggressive, other supports need to be put in there at the same time as the cognitive capacity is being increased. With a cognitive lens on behavior, ideally we're responding differently to the person. We understand them a little more. And of course, as I mentioned, there's some specialized support may be required, but also we're seeing the behaviors with more compassion. There were lots of questions about what parents and teachers can do. Now, TDCC can really help you with other services around putting in supports and strategies. But what I really ask parents and teachers to do is look at children with a cognitive lens. Understand the cognitive functions a little more and really view your child or your children that you serve, look at them with a cognitive lens. It's so important to do that. And then learning and social skills, there were a number of questions around that. I think, again, go under the label, see what is underperforming there and try and question that. Emma mentioned the cognitive questionnaire because there were many other questions about how do I know if someone is learning, learning differently. Have a look at that cognitive questionnaire. It's really enlightening. Remember, you must keep the report at the end. Emma will not receive that, but keep the report. It's really enlightening into how the brain of that person is functioning, your observation of that. Emotional dysregulation, I had touched on that when I talked about the amygdala. If we are overstressed, if we are not understanding the world around us, we will look and feel emotionally dysregulated. We can calm that down. There were a couple of questions very specific to Arrowsmith, and that's when you can contact me. How can Arrowsmith be integrated or adapted into a mainstream secondary school? If you want to, that person wants to email me, you can do that. And then are there computer-assisted exercises versus physical exercises? I'll just answer that one very quickly. What's healthy for the heart is healthy for the brain. So physical exercise is really, really important and really helps keep our brain fit and active. And I'm going to turn that computer-assisted exercise into cognitive exercises. Sometimes they come in the form of a computer-assisted, but sometimes they can be pen and paper or auditory, and in other programs they can look different. But that cognitive strengthening, that very targeted cognitive strengthening is very different than physical exercise. That targeting that specific function to strengthen it, that's in its own field. So they are very different. And again, please follow up with Emma if you want to ask any questions. Brain Links by the Developing Child Centre, all the details are there. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. It's been such a pleasure to be with you today, and I hope that you have had some of your questions answered, and I hope that you are going away with a cognitive lens on the people around you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. And we appreciate your time and participation. And a big thank you again for you, to you, Debbie, for your insightful session today about transforming learning and behavior in children who learn differently. And we hope you found today's webinar helpful. And we're wishing you a great weekend and looking forward to see everyone again. See you next time. Bye-bye.
you